Hello, Christian.
Hi, Professor Diana. How are you today? Are you kind of sick, right?
Well, no, what happens is that I have allergies. So
Oh, I
that's
thought you had
why
a cold.
it sounds like if I had a cold, but no, it is because of my
Oh,
bad
okay.
allergies. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I
So
thought you
each
had a
time,
cold.
yeah, no, each time I have there are changes in the weather, I get those reactions.
Uh,
Yeah. How are you doing?
okay. Well, better now. We're able to sleep like what, like 5 hours now. The babies are getting better now.
Okay. And why were they sick? What happened with them?
N- No, we had to feed them like every 2 hours
Ah, okay. I
at
got
the
it.
beginning, but now they are 4 months old now, so they're holding on now. So they eat the last one. They eat like at 11 until like 5 in the morning.
Oh, I see.
So it's much better now. At the beginning was tough.
Well, you're getting more and more sleep each time.
Yeah. And and since they're twins, they're like connected. So one cries, then the other one cries, then wow.
Oh my God. Well, Fernando is here. Hello, Fernando.
Diana, we had an encounter with Professor George, I think on Friday, and we talked about 6 of us are gonna take the coterminal.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah. So it's been like pretty amazing. I think we're privileged to be on those in those six among those six students.
Right. And when are you having that encounter?
We already had it last Friday with Professor Jorge.
Okay, good. And when are you going to start those studies?
I don't know. He said maybe he didn't give us like the date, but we had to turn in some letters from the school because where I'm working at. I talked to my coordinator today, and they authorized so for me to record my classes. So that part is okay.
Good. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Okay, Luis, hello.
Good evening, teacher and Christian. How are you doing? And Fernando, I
Hey,
think.
hey, Luis.
Yes, how are you doing? What
Good.
about your
How's
family?
your work, Luis?
Your
Oh,
kids?
Luis. Oh.
You happy with your kids?
It's been a blast. Or it's
Yeah.
but it's beautiful. It's great. It's great to be a
Yeah.
dad.
Yes, of course, yeah. It's the most beautiful experience that we can live when we have
Do
kids.
you have Luis? Do you have family?
My family, yes, my children are in the United States. They live with their mother.
Oh,
My
okay.
son is 23 years old now, and my daughter is 20. And
Oh, okay.
I saw my son last year after 18 years that I didn't see him.
Hmm,
18. And my daughter, I have not seen her since she was born
Since
because I was in the United States. So 20 years ago, she was born, and I left, and I only met her by the internet, through the internet, you know.
yeah, okay.
But I hope this year she's gonna next month on May they are gonna visit me here. First time after 20 years.
And oh my
great.
God, man.
Yes, my daughter. Yeah, I'm
And
waiting.
where are they? Well,
Yeah,
what state are they, Luis?
they are in Orlando, Florida, with their mom.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
My ex wife got married with a Brazilian American Brazilian, and she is happy now. You know, she already had
No,
7 years of
Luis, look what you said. Now she's happy. No, she was happy with you first.
yes, yes, of course, yes, but you know, Okay, I prefer not say anything. Thank you, Christian. I appreciate that.
Okay, all right.
How are you, teacher Diana?
Good. I'm okay. Yeah. Has
Okay,
been
you are
cold
good.
today.
Yes, look at me.
Yeah, I know. But we needed some rain, so that's okay.
Yeah, I
Yes,
love it when
perfect.
it rains. I love it.
Yes, wonderful day.
Well, guys. Hello, Andres.
Hello, good evening. Sorry for being a couple of minutes late,
Don't
but
worry,
I'm here.
we're waiting your classmates. So
Yeah.
Don't worry,
we can
Andres.
start in 3 minutes.
Okay, awesome.
Hello, Lina.
Good evening, teacher. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Luis, I have a question for you, Luis.
Who?
Chris.
Yes.
Luis, what school do you work at? Where? What school?
Now I'm working in Santiago Mayor School. You know, it's in 175 Street with the Avenida Boyacá. Yes.
Okay, so you changed your school? You're working for
Yes,
another school now?
after 3 years, yes, I was working with Divino Salvador School,
Yeah.
Divino Salvador, but I already quit and I am working since January over there.
So it's much
It's
better for you now?
yes, it's a small school, but I'm happy. I am, how do you say, tranquil? How do you say, I am peaceful? I have peaceful, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
better.
okay.
Thank you very much for asking that.
All right, Luis.
Yes, I appreciate that. The question.
Hello, Maria. Hello, Liliana.
Hello, how's everybody?
Good. Okay, I think we have
Everything great.
good. So,
Hey, Andres.
well, as usual, I will ask you some questions about the readings that you had last week. And well, the idea is that each one of you participate and try to answer at least one question. Um, if you have questions also, you can ask anytime. Okay. Hello, Henry.
Hello, teacher. Good evening.
Evening.
Can you hear me, teacher?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. How are you and how are your classmates?
Good, good. Thank you.
Pretty good,
Okay.
Henry.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for answering.
Yes, thank you very much, teacher. Okay.
Okay, so the last week you had a task about defining groups. That is the title of the chapter that you read. So we are going to review that. And we will start by reviewing what social linguistics study. So do you remember? What do you remember about it?
Well, social linguistics studied like the use of language, but also like the social implications of that language use. So the choices that are made, the identities that are made, like all the social and political and economical and geographical like issues or situations that or conditions that may affect language and language choices. Also taking into account like the linguistic um, elements that are used within those social situations. It's kind of what I understand.
Yeah, very good. Okay, then the chapter presented three concepts because when linguistics try to came up with rules regarding how people speak and the language choices they make in societies, they needed to find out a definition for the word for the work group. So they came out with 3 concepts. Speech community is one, linguistic community is the second one, and the third one is community of practice. So we're going to review the first definition of a speech community. Who remembers what that concept refers to?
Actually, it's a group of people who come to share like norms, linguistic norms for language use. Yeah, and then from living together and interacting among themselves.
Norms for language use. Okay, what else? So those 3 words or concepts that I mentioned at the beginning, speech community, then we had, then we had linguistic community, and then we have community of practice. The first one that was created was a speech community, but the idea was to define how groups communicated. So what is like the key idea of the concept speech community?
Good evening, teacher.
Teacher.
Good evening.
Sure.
Who wants to speak?
Lina? Me, teacher, Lina.
Lina, okay.
Okay, teacher. Okay, bueno, for me it was a little difficult to try to understand the meaning of the speech community, because at the beginning it said that it was by the language, by some criteria, like various criteria, like that group of people can use the same language, or by the region, or by the participation in a set of shared norms. But after in other part of the document said that they are defined partly through their relationship with other communities. So a community must have a certain social cohesiveness, but you can at the same time to be part of a speech community or another. It depends of the purpose or the particular occasion. So maybe you can have you can be a part of the Canadian speech community, but you in other context, or you can identify with other speech community. But I think that the most important of this concept is a little complex. You should take into account the region, the language, the purpose, and the shared norms. Is that I understood?
Good.
Teacher,
So yes,
sorry.
Lilian.
For example, the members of a profession could be a speech community because they share in the same language about their professions, occupation.
Okay.
Is good?
Community of practice, no? Is not that?
Any other idea?
The
Yes, teacher. Can I say you?
Luis?
What I understood as our classmate that speech community is a group of people who share the same language, speech characteristics, and the way of interpreting communication. And they influence, okay, groups of a speech community interact regularly. Speech communities may be large regions or maybe in an area with a common or different accent, and could be or small units of families or friends or something like that.
Okay.
But what I understood, to answer like your question, at least what I understood was that speech community is very interaction centered. So it's determined by interaction. And then it says in the reading that the other term, the linguistic community, came up because there were some situations in which not there was not necessarily necessarily face-to-face interaction, one, and two, the linguistic elements that they may share not always should, I mean, in the first definition that we see of linguistic of speech community, it talks about norms, about shared norms and shared language, but then it says that some people can be part of the same group and not necessarily share the same linguistic norms. So I think that speech community focuses a lot on interaction and language.
Okay.
Not the same language, but the same variety of the language. Yes.
Something else? Right here we have the definition. It says that language is both an individual possession and a social possession. We would expect, therefore, that certain individuals would behave linguistically like other individuals. They might be said to speak the same language or the same dialect or the same variety. That is, to employ the same code. In that respect, they would be members of the same speech community. So as some of you mentioned, it happens that we also communicate with people that also have different dialects, different varieties, other codes. We might be bilinguals or multilingual and belong to other communities of people who share same interests. So that's why this first concept was not broad enough to explain like the other interactions that might happen among people, and that was like the first definition that linguists came up with in order to try to define how people interacted and how rules could be explained among people who interact about any topic. So this one is all, as Liliana mentioned, this is this concept also takes into account, or only takes into account, the idea of having the same dialect, the same variety, the same code. But we know that is more complex than that. Okay, so then
Sorry, I have a question.
yes.
What is an example of variety of the language, for example?
Okay, who remembers the linguistic aspects that we mentioned last time that are related to the idea of varieties?
So varieties can be different pronunciations, different grammar structures that may be used, different even words to denote like the same thing.
The
Kind of
accent.
those things.
Yes, those three
The
ones.
accent.
We talked
The
about
accent. For example, the paisa is a yes.
yes,
Okay.
it's a variety of the Spanish spoken in Colombia, but also we have varieties of that are identified because of the use of different vocabulary. Like in some parts of the country, tostada means a different thing. So tostada in Cali means different to tostada in Bogota. So those are like examples of varieties regarding the aspects of accent and vocabulary, but there are also differences or varieties regarding grammar, differences in grammar. And last time, the example that we had was the use of have got and have in English.
Mm-hmm.
So that the structure changes when we
British
ask
and
questions.
English. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, Lina mentioned the idea of cohesion in a speech community. So, what does it bring cohesion and differentiation in a speech community?
Does it bring?
Teacher, could you please repeat the question?
Yes, what cause that a person feels that belongs to a speech community, or that a person feels that doesn't belong to that speech community?
That is what has to do with, I don't know, I don't know if I'm remembering correct, when it talks about solidarity and identity, maybe. I remember those two terms, that
Identity, yes.
solidarity is that you tend to identify with people, and the more that you identify with people, is that, or the more that you feel that you have things in common, is going to make you feel identified with that group, one. And identity, it also talked about the importance of who you think you are, and what you think you are, makes you feel part of a certain community.
Okay,
I don't
that's
know if
good.
I'm
It's
answering the question.
yes. They sharing the same social means, two ways of speaking.
Exactly. So, as Andres mentioned and Liliana mentioned, it is related to identity. So, if you use certain words to communicate, it's because you want people identify yourself as a person who belongs to, for example, in Colombia, to a certain social class, or who belongs to a certain group of professionals, or a person who belongs to a certain ethnic community. So you choose the words and you decide what accent and what variety you want to use that makes you feel part of that community. So identities are concerned to that. So the identities are the ones that uh, is the aspect that makes people uh, be part of a community.
Mm.
Okay, then we have the concept of groups. Hold on a second. Before that, let's review the concept of linguistic community. That is the second concept that linguistics uh, developed or created in order to try to explain how those interactions take place. So, what is different between a speech community and linguistic community?
One difference is that the linguistic community have the same language, not a variety,
Uh-huh.
same language. And the people of this group have the knowledge about this language. For example, a Spanish speaker is a linguistic community.
Okay. Something else?
Yes, teacher. I remember I read that linguistic community is a group of people that share the same natural language semantics and practices they already semantics or the practices that they already have established in that community.
Uh-huh. So before speech community was concerned or refer to the idea of using the same variety or dialect. And here in linguistic community, the idea was the use of the same language. So a social group which may be either monolingual or multilingual, characterized by frequency of social interaction. So here in this definition, the additional information or the way it was enriched, the concept was with the idea of frequency of interaction, and then that the community could be multilingual. But here says linguistic communities may consist of small groups bound together by face-to-face contact. Now we know that it doesn't apply. We can have interactions that are not face-to-face, or may cover large regions depending on the level of abstraction we wish to achieve. Many societies exist in which bilingualism and multilingualism are the norm, and the use of multilingualism may be part of the speech community norms. But well, this concept is also, it lacks also from other aspects that we know are connected to the idea of interactions. So that's why some of you said at the beginning that it is much more complex, right? Good. Then we have community of practice, which is the third
one.
concept. What is the concept about?
Well, I think it's people from it's people from a particular profession or a group where they share information and experiences, I believe.
Is adding to
Well, actually, it's to learn from each other, and experiences.
Okay, then here the concept was not related to the idea of using one or other language, but to the idea of sharing the same knowledge, right?
Yes, members can speak different languages.
Sure. Good evening.
Good evening, John.
Thank you. Yes, according to what is a community of practice, I would like to say it is a social group that there are many people, they want to develop knowledge and they want to share knowledge based to reflections and experiences.
Okay, yeah. The idea was to share knowledge about a specific topic.
Exactly. Yes, of course. Basic experiences.
Okay, any other idea about this community of practice?
Yes, there are interactions between the members.
Yeah, and they share the ways of talking, they share beliefs, they share values, power relations, ways of doing things.
But also they are like they are like ongoing. They are not fixed. They may change, and you may be part of a speech practice community in a moment, and then in another moment be part of another practice community, or in a certain moment feel left out. So they gave the example, for example, of the case in which you I don't know, maybe are part or are not part of a professional community, so you do share the language and you feel bonded in certain way with the group, but when they start talking about the thing that you don't know, maybe you don't feel part of it, something that is like fluid.
That's also important. So as Fernando and Andres just pointed out, so those speech communities can have, in some moments, can have the person or people in it can feel more connected, while in other times they might feel they don't belong to that, according to their beliefs, according to their knowledge. of the topic of their interest. Sometimes the person can change their mind, uh, his or her mind, and then stop belonging to that community.
Teacher.
Yes.
Another idea at it is relation. I think that it is related with that you are talking is about the that such communities of practice shape the individuals and provide them with their identities. Um, and often circumscribe what they can do. And if a member don't feel connected with that, obviously he's not going to be part of that. But the community, I could say that the power of the community is that try to shape individuals, no?
The power of the community. Well,
it's like not the power. No, in other word, I am trying to do a reflection about that. This is not it is not said in the text, but if you don't feel identified with the community, the people led the community, but because provide them with their identities is something, I don't know, there's something strong. The communities of practice, like they are identified by they can do, and if you don't feel part of that, you maybe are not going to be part of that community. I don't know if I can be clear.
No, I got your idea.
Ahí
Eh,
mamá se despertó, gracias a Dios.
John?
Y ahí guardé el carro, hermano.
John?
Sí, sí, sí.
Okay, hold.
Teacher Diana, could we consider
Muy temprano,
as an example
mi
of
hermano.
community of practice, like
Entonces,
a
carro y lo
political
llevo.
party, members of a political party that can get together and speak like the same language? I mean, they have the same beliefs or values. Could we consider that as an example of community of practice? Thank you.
Yes, that can be considered a community of practice. But remember that these concepts have been developed because the idea for social linguistics is to find out the rules that societies have in order to communicate. What happens with the language that is used by people in societies? How can we come up with those rules? So, in order to define those rules or talk about them, it was necessary to come up with a definition of groups, since societies are uh, defined as group of people who have the same interest in
De una,
different aspects. So when you say that politicians belong or or people that belong to political parties belong to the same community of practice is right, is correct, because they share the same, they share common knowledge about a topic, and they interact about those specific topics. They share same beliefs. So cohesion in this case is increases because there are more common ideas among those people who belong to those parties. So that's a good example. Here we have that Ecker and Jeanette define a group of people, a speech community, as a group of people who interact regularly. Such groups of communities themselves are either changing their boundaries, are often porous, and internal relationships shift. They must constantly reinvent and recreate themselves. So here the linguists were taking into account the idea of uh, of people that can change their mind when regarding their interest, so that they can belong to different groups. All right, then we have social network. What is important about that concept, or what is new? What is new, taking into account the other three concepts that we already reviewed?
That it takes into account like the connections. I think I remember that what it says is that it takes into account the connections that may be between the members of a group, and that they take into account that someone's social network may include the people who are connected with that person and who may be connected with one another or not connected with one another. So it takes into account that you are connected with different types of people, and that those people with whom you are connected may be connected within each other, but with one another, but may not be connected with one another. So there may be different types of relationships between you and the people around you, and how those people connect with each other. And well, that's why it's called a network. That is kind of what happens with social media. Yeah. So it's kind of what happens with social media, that you have some friends or you follow certain people, and not all of us have the same social media, even if we know each other for a long time. We have different people and different connections.
Good. So it is related to connections and types of connections. If somebody else wants to add something about types of connections regarding social networks?
Teacher, good evening. How are you?
Hello, George.
Maybe to talk about the channel that people use to communicate between each other. There are different kinds of channels to communicate in a social network, not just in personal way. Maybe using the internet, using cell phones, using another kind of channels to communicate between each other to create that social network.
Yeah, so types of channels are, well, they exist. But what about the types of connections? What does the definition says about that?
What, teacher?
The
Types of connections among people in social networks. In this definition, the important thing is not the type of language that is used, or
Formal or informal communication, teacher?
not really.
Are you referring to the what they defined in the text as dense social network and or multiplex social network? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, but what happened with the connections? So Andres mentioned that there are different types of connections.
Yes.
Yes,
Teacher,
teacher.
I think that is I think that is an online platform which different people around the world connect to have social relationship with other people.
But if social linguistics is interested in defining the rules that people of societies when they interact, and is trying to define groups. So it's trying to say that groups are people who what?
Because when you are talking with people with different country, you share different things, different idea, interests, or maybe you can share different dialects, accents, and that is a different way to communicate. And I think that maybe by this platform, you can learn different way of communication, teacher.
Okay. And what else, John? John, you wanted to add?
Yes, of course. Yes. According that I know, we have different kind of situation. For example, it depends of the goals. And here we have our goals. Our goal is study and connecting each others in order to learn English and in order to learn our careers. And other goals could be the people want to know each others according to social networks, maybe make friends and interacting each others. For me, it depends of the goal the people have in order to know each other or in order to learn something else.
Okay. All right. Goals are important. So, or interest, right? So, regarding the interest people have, so we communicate with one or the other. Something else regarding those connections?
Yes, teacher. The members of the social network share the same means about how they speak. For example, the emoticons. They have the same wave of the speaking and minutes.
Okay, so yes, so those social networks, in those social networks, people share, say, the same ways of speaking. So because that is related to the identity of the network and the people that interact in those networks. What else?
You can also share picture movies and talk about the different thing. And talking about the social network, it's important to mention that the most important right now is Facebook, for example. Through Facebook, you have the opportunity to meet different people around the world, and it's very, very important right now. Almost everybody has Facebook at the moment.
Okay, well, what what the book said about social networks regarding connections is that people might have more a strong connection with others that belong to the same, let's say, community. So, for example, in this group, all of you have the same interests as John mentioned, which is to practice the language and to become a teacher, an English teacher. But in the same group, you might have more uh, common interests with others, for example, about hobbies or about your likes or about your lifestyle. So you start interacting more and more with those who have more commonalities with you. So that's what social networks include in the definition, that those connections can be stronger if you share more commonalities with some people. But if you share less common things with other people in the same community, in the same network, your network is gonna be weaker. So here,
Teacher, and the text mentions to frequency.
exactly, how often do you talk to people?
How often? Yeah.
So,
If you have more connection with people A or people 2, which frequency what's the difference between the frequency to one and another?
that makes that the connection becomes stronger. If you talk more frequently with a person, let's say with person B, you talk more frequently with person B than with person F. So your connection with this person is gonna be stronger. So
So
frequency.
teacher, can we say, like, for instance, like Instagram, when you follow like an artist or any of these YouTubers, now you belong to this group because If you're following, it's because you're interested in him and you have things in common with the rest of the followers. So can we say that it's an example of this community, like when you follow an artist?
Yes, that's a good example. So if you reply the messages, if you interact with those people through tests, through internet, through any other channel, that is frequent. So you are gonna feel identified with that community, with those people. So you belong to that network. No? So in that case, again, since social linguistics tries to define the rules that are related to interactions among people in societies. So here with the definition of social network, they are trying to include the idea of frequency, but also the idea of how strong or weak your relation is with the people who belong to the same network. Um, and the idea of interest, how many interests do you share with the people in the network that make your connection stronger or weaker?
Yeah, and how about the language they negotiate to set in a social network interaction? Because I understand if people all around the world interact with each other through the network, they must negotiate, right? Like set like a standard English as a way of communication.
But I mean, I
So,
think,
Andres?
yeah,
yeah, the thing is that I think that there's like a bit of a confusion on when they talk about social network. In this case, they're not talking about social media necessarily. I mean, not internet based only, not only social apps, but it's talking about social networks in the sense that we all are part of different types of social networks in our jobs, in our everyday life, and also in the internet-based apps. Because I see that some are getting a little bit confused on social network, meaning Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and those are social networks, but you are part of social networks that don't involve online media.
Uh-huh. Yeah, there are different channels as George mentioned. So we have internet, we have the cell phone, we have face-to-face interactions. So not only the interactions as Andres mentioned, the interactions uh, that are done through internet or cell phone are the ones related to social networks, but other ones as the face-to-face one.
Teacher, and the text mentioned two kinds. I don't know, maybe more, but I remember two kinds of social network: dense social network and multiplex social network, depending on the kind of interaction between the members of each one.
The frequency.
The frequency and the kind of interactions. If the members just have work interaction, it's a different kind of social network. If the people share work identity and they share outside work too.
Teacher.
John.
Teacher, according that you say that the communication becomes stronger. Here's in our career, we have some example. For example, we our classmate that, for example, we have some classmates that we used to work constantly because we know how we work together. For that reason, when we choose a classmate, we need to send emails, we communicate constantly. Here we have a sample. The communication becomes stronger because we need to organize tasks, works, activities, and we chance some information each other in order to create that activity or that task.
So that what you just mentioned makes me remember the idea of why some students might interact more than other groups of students in different classes. Yeah, sometimes
Yes,
we
correct.
have some classes in which students just don't want to participate or don't want to work in groups because they don't share same beliefs or same interests with the other members in the same class. So that can affect also interaction in classes. These topics also help us to find out the reasons why bullying happens in classes, or how to deal with that if we identify the words that are being used by the members of the class, the students in the class, or if there is a type of power relations in the class, or the one group of students uh, are bullers, or just have the power of knowing more about the language, so that the rest of the class feels less comfortable when participating orally. So all that can be analyzed through the discourse that emerges in the class, to try to understand what happens in class regarding interactions, or the causes or the consequences or the reasons for those type of interactions that occur in classes, in different classes. There is something that I didn't understand, and it was related to what Fernando was just mentioned, uh, related to negotiation. So could you please uh, explain that again, Fernando? You mentioned.
Yeah, I mentioned the negotiation of the language they share when they interact with each other. I understand that in a group of people who connect with through the network, they might have different languages, different dialects, different way of speaking, right in their countries. But when they share a social network, they must get all together and share the same language. I understand that standard language is now the how you say hegemonic hegemonica, how you say that,
Uh-huh.
hegemonic, an hegemonic language that maybe used worldwide, and that's what I meant. They all get together and decide what language they gonna share in order to communicate. That's what
Yeah,
I meant.
the idea of negotiating language is connected to the idea of power. So in an interaction, so we need to analyze the power relations that occur there. So what are the position that each one has? What is the place where they are talking? So what is the type of relationship the speakers have? So that not always there are the negotiation of meaning or negotiation of language, that doesn't always happen, because it is connected to the power relations that are there between or among the people that are interacting. Sometimes
Right.
you just you choose your words, taking into account the person you are talking to. What is the position of that
Teacher,
person, or your relationship with that person? Lina?
teacher. A question that you are talking about, it has to do with the ideology,
No. Not,
because in the ideology, but it's the other topic that we have to study. We had to study the ideology language, because you mentioned that the person choose can choose, I don't know, if maybe how to speak, or maybe it's not something related to the ideology language, since the position that the people is speaking, maybe if the person can the freedom to speak Spanish or to speak English, it is not related to the power too, or is it another?
yes, I understand your idea. So we choose words that make other people identify ourselves as somebody who belongs to a certain community. And also I use some words according to the ideology I have about the language. So I can use some accent, I can use some words because I have the ideology that those words and accent are the ones that are the proper ones, the accepted ones, the ones that I need to use. That is related to the ideology. But also I choose words taking into account the power relations that take place when I interact with different people. So in Fernando's participation, he mentioned the idea of negotiating words, negotiating language. So that means that when we speak with people who have like the same position, we might be in the we might have the opportunity to exchange information in a free way, express ideas without or with less restrictions than if we express ideas with people who have more power over us.
Ah, yes, I understand.
So,
point. Yes.
Anyway, we choose
maybe because you feel like a social pressure or something like that, and you feel scared about the speak. Maybe if you are more comfortable, you can speak. It's something about that.
Yeah, if you don't have that
confidence,
if you don't, yes, if you don't feel, if you are not familiar, or if you don't, if your relationship with the person that you are talking to is not is a formal relation. Yes, if you don't have yeah, if you have a formal relation with the person you are talking to, you are more prevented to use some words.
Diana, it's like having groups in the classroom. When you work, let's say, a topic, and you make groups, and you have quiet kids and you have active kids. The active the active kids are going to talk. The other ones are going to stay quiet because they don't feel like confident and they don't have that close relationship with the other kids. So they prefer just to stay quiet and sit there, and that's it.
Good. That's a good
example.
A good idea, a good example. Yes.
Yes.
So in that
And
case,
that happens every single day in class.
exactly.
Yeah.
In that case, power is the one that is affecting interaction.
Exactly. And kids really feel like they don't know much because the other ones who are the ones that talk, the smart ones, and the other ones just stay there and listen, but they don't participate
Uh-huh.
because the other kids have the power, the kids that really know the subject or what the teacher's talking about.
Uh-huh. And what about what Lina asked regarding ideologies? So we also choose words according to the ideologies we have about the language. So what could be a good example of ideologies? If you remember, you read an article that was related to ideologies in a school in California.
Yeah.
Hmm? What were the ideologies in that place?
In the Christian example, or
In the example
No.
of that school, at that school.
California school?
Yeah.
They were free to choose the languages to talk, English or Spanish. There was not a specific rule to speak in English or a specific rule to speak in Spanish. Kids choose how
Yes,
languages they want to use.
okay, that was the idea that the school had. So the
Yes.
ideology that the school had was that
laissez-faire, yes.
both languages had the same power, or the students needed to use both. Why? Because the school wanted the students to feel what about the languages and connected with culture.
Yeah, no, they wanted the
Uh,
students to feel bilingual and
mhm.
bicultural. I mean, they wanted to
Yes.
share freedom in the choice of the language.
Mhm.
And then, depending with they were doing the activity with, they choose one language or the other.
Exactly.
They, yeah, they like when they work with their tutors, they choose English. But when volunteer mothers come by and start talking about their things and their business and whatever, then they listen to their mothers speak Spanish, so they choose Spanish. But
Mhm.
the article determined or concluded that the hegemonic language was English because of a social influence. The children came from their homes and their parents told them to speak just English because they need to
Mhm.
study English. They need for the life to to get to know the English. So the kids were kind of forced mm, to speak English in their classes. But the purpose of the school was to share a bicultural and bilingual
Mhm.
atmosphere among the students and the tutors and so on.
Well,
Okay,
The
well, okay, go ahead, Miss.
Maria.
Liliana.
Okay,
Yes, I was
Maria, then Liliana, then
Thank
Andres.
you.
I was gonna say something similar to Fernando. The aim of the project was for them to feel identified with the language and the culture. So the coordinator of the program wanted to have like a bicultural and bilingual context for them. And there were different backgrounds for the children. There were some that came from families that the main language was Spanish and parents wouldn't speak English. Others in which they spoke both and they interacted in both in different contexts, in at home and outside in their jobs. And others, just as Fernando mentioned, that they kind of prohibited their kids to speak Spanish because they needed to speak the language. But the project showed how the kids freely selected the language that they wanted to use in the different like scenarios that they have in the tareas tables and in the computer or ICT moments they had with undergraduate students. And something that I liked was that this theory or the rule, from now I don't remember the author's last name, but they were able to identify that it was something that they found in common with the previous research that they had done. And it was that they would speak the language, they were able to identify what language the other people would speak better, like their native tongue, and they would interact according to that language. So, for example, with the teenagers that were tutoring them with the computer use, they would respond to them in English. I mean, the interaction will be in English only. And something that called my attention was that one of these teenagers, he knew some Spanish, and he would like kind of wanted to have like a conversation or maybe practice his Spanish with the kid, and he well, I don't know exactly what his reaction was, but he said
Yes.
like, how come you're talking to me in Spanish? That's not like your identity language. Or so I think that was nice to see that reaction from the kid.
Okay, very good. Liliana, and then Andres.
Oh,
Yes, as Maria said, the program in the program there is not imposition of any language policy. Rather, children are controlled of their own language choice.
That was the ideology of the school. Andres?
Yes.
no, I haven't raised my hand. I
Okay,
think it was Christian who was going to say something.
Teacher,
Yeah,
George?
I was. Okay, go ahead.
Please.
to be honest, for me, the ideology of the program of that program is is good, but I think it promotes something that I call Spanglish, because the people tends to say the half of the sentence in Spanish and the other part of the sentence in English. I don't know. So the ideology is that kids feel confident in class, but I don't know how it works. How it will work, for example, here in Colombia, if we want to teach English and use this kind of what kind of program like this,
No,
because
but
No, no,
sorry, I don't
no.
agree
Just
with that because the point of here is that well, two things is one, code switching may be there are studies that say that code switching may be acceptable, and in early learners it can be useful for kids to be able to start making well the switch between their native tongue to the language, to the target language. So of course in later stages the use of Spanish wouldn't be acceptable, but on earlier stages they would. That in our context. But here it's a very particular context in which kids mostly have roots on both cultures. So they are in a certain place in which many of them live in San Diego or Tijuana, which are like a couple of kilometers away, and they have roots of both on both cultures. So what they are trying to do what I understand that they're trying to do in the school is not promote Spanglish, but more that kids may keep their cultural roots and maybe still be connected to their to their native tongue or to their parents' tongues while still learning. But they are still going to learn English because they live in an English community. And also there are also studies that in the younger the kid, uh, they are it's easy for them to jump, and actually the reading showed that the kids easily can pass from one language to the other and be effective in both languages. So they're not starting sentences in one and ending in the other, but they can be very effective using both languages. So that's what the school was trying to promote. At the end of the day, we saw that there are some ideologies, both in teachers and in parents, who said, we don't want them to learn Spanish. We need them to learn English because it's a language they're going to be they're going to develop their lives in. But the school, what they were trying to do is to give relevance to both cultures and to both languages, and that the kids at the end of the day had the ability to communicate in both. That is what I understand.
Yeah.
Sure.
George, I have a question for you. Do you consider that in order to learn English properly, it is necessary to avoid the use of the in Colombia,
Spanish.
it is necessary to avoid the use of Spanish?
Teacher, I haven't thought yet, because I'm just finished, and what Andres says is very interesting for me, because I think on my position that when you want to learn English, for example, you have to be in contact with the contact with the native languages affect that process. For me, I think that, because I haven't thought yet. But if I want to hear the experiences from my classmates, for example, Christian and Andres, that they have thought for a long time.
Okay.
What I try to do, for example, on my particular classes, I always try to do it in English. I say no Spanish, please. But maybe I'm wrong, and this kind of debates are good, because for me, for example, the position of my classmates are very important.
Okay.
That's my ideal. But
I ask you because what you answer, what you reply, in your reply, you were showing your ideology about how to learn a language.
Learn
Yeah,
English. Yes.
and that's why you are saying that that you consider that when you want to learn a language, you need to use as much English as possible, and that's what you will do when you teach a lesson. So
Yes, teacher, that's right.
those words that you will use in class are based on your ideology about how to learn a language. So as Andres mentioned or explained, the ideology of the school was to have students learn both languages because they had both cultures. Somebody else raised the hand.
Yes, teacher, me, Lynn.
Lina.
Yes, teacher. I think that another aspect about the after school program is I understood that one of the goal of the program was to help the students to develop their cognitive ability by solving problems or um, um, through the game. So in that, by this reason, for the after school program, it's not as important what language the students use, because it is going to be part of their development. When they interact, they are going to use both languages, but in order to solving problems. So the final objective or the final goal is to develop their cognitive abilities. I think that is part of the ideology
That the school
to
had.
give the students the freedom to choose, and by no imposition of one language on another. Because the children are the controllers of their own language, and in order to learn, to help they to develop another abilities. I don't know.
Exactly. But that is this article is a good example of how complex it is to try to impose the ideology that you have. The school had an ideology,
Yeah.
parents had a different one,
The
students
teacher have an ideology.
the teacher had an ideology, and
The mother had another.
the state had a different one. So
So Diana, I could say, for example, where I work at, the ideology is no Spanish at all, only English in class. And if they see us like talking to Spanish to our kids, we get in big trouble.
okay, that's a good example. So that's the ideology of how to learn a language at the school where you work. So
Exactly.
each student that goes there needs to have share the same ideology, or they are gonna get into trouble, or they are gonna feel uncomfortable, or if at the end they are going to just quit and go to a different school.
They will feel powerless. Yeah.
Yes, or you fit there, or you choose a different place where to study or where to work. Maria Fernanda.
Well, I was going to add something, but then Andres mentioned my point as well. Yeah, it's not about translating or just using Spanglish, but it was the code switching that the students were doing, and that is something that happens like in their brains even without thinking. It's just they have what Andres mentioned. They had like roots or foundations of both languages, and they just select, like their brain selects whatever words they need to just to get their point through, just to communicate. So even there was an example given in the research article also, in which during the tareas table, the kids were interacting between one another, and where if one of them continued the conversation in Spanish, the other one would continue in Spanish, and then if they flipped or code switched to English, then they would continue in English. And there was one girl that did like call their attention and said like, oh, it's English, English, only English, because that was usually or mainly what they had in their heads from maybe from their families at that moment, that they had to practice only English. But I guess it's like a clear example of how the process develops in at homes or households in which kids are exposed to two languages. I don't remember, I think it was a teacher that said that she grew up in a Spanish household, or at least one of her parents spoke the language, but she lost it
Yes.
when while growing up. And she makes the reflection saying, I wish I wouldn't have lost it, because now I know it would have been like an important tool for her just to interact with others, to get to know the culture, and mainly in the states in which the population, the Hispanic population is high. So
And she lost her friends, she said, no?
yes, yes.
It's sad. It's sad. Yes.
Okay. Something else you want to add about ideologies?
So, what I would want to say regarding what I said earlier is regarding code switching is that I think they use, just to answer what I think Jorge was the one who asked, is code switching. I mean, of course, for example, in my case, I teach in the higher grades, 9th, 10th, and 11th, in a bilingual school that has a very good level of English. So of course, in my case, I also don't allow Spanish speaking and don't speak in Spanish with my students uh, in class or out of it, just because their level. But what I was saying is that there is research that shows that in some cases, especially in early learners, and depending, of course, on situations and whatever, that code switching is acceptable, and not only acceptable but useful, because of course speaking only in English is awesome, and schools such as where Christian works or where I work, it's awesome because you can speak all the time in English and kids understand and are able. But there are also other contexts in which if you just give your class totally in English and they are kids that are
Ignorance.
older, and then you're not going to accomplish anything in your class because they just won't understand any of your instructions, and so they are not going to be able to learn anything. Um, so code switching could be acceptable depending on situations. And of course, for example, in the case of my kid also studies in a fully bilingual school, and their teachers are mostly American teachers who come here to do their practices. But the way that they get to the fully bilingual part is that the first couple of years they have a teacher aide who speaks Spanish, and the first classes when they are like in pre-K or something, they are 50-50 English and Spanish, and that percentage starts switching until right now my kid is in second grade, and in second grade it's fully bilingual. So what they do is that the main teacher doesn't speak in Spanish, but they have a teacher aide who is going to be there to help them, and to when the kid is lost, to help them like translate. But they don't have the main teacher speaking in Spanish, because in many cases they are American, and they just can't. It's not that even they don't want it. So what I'm saying is, not necessarily because there's some use of Spanish in a classroom means that kids are not going to are not going to accomplish their English learning. That's what I was like referring to earlier.
Uh-huh.
Teacher, that means that the ideology define the way to teach and
Yes,
to learn.
yes. So the ideas that you have about how to teach and learn are the ones that are going to help you make decisions about what to do in class, what words to use, and how to behave in class. So, well, in my case, for example, I find it kind of hard to have some of my students understand that it is good to teach a lesson not based on grammar, but choose a context and then develop a class based on a context or a situation. Some of my students have the idea that it is necessary to start from the explanation of grammar and vocabulary, and then move to the more complex thing, and the ideology that the program has regarding how to teach English is related to the idea of communicative approach communication. So we go from an example to the development of stages that help students understand what the example is about, and not we don't start from the isolated words, isolated words and grammar explanations to other things, I mean, to more complex
Teacher,
exercises without a context. A question? Yes, who wants to ask?
oh no, I was, it's Junior. I was going to say something about what you just said, because like I worked with Sena, and all the years I had to teach A1 level, like always. So I always, like, for example, in the 2019, I started teaching like with grammar, and well, the results, it was great, but the class, it wasn't too much fun. Like, I mean, in this year, what I did, it was to start with like just using the alphabet and some like basic vocabulary, and we start to practice a lot with the alphabet and doing some practices with spelling and that kind of stuff. And they were so powerful, and they were like, okay, we want you to see you more, and I start just to work like this with vocabulary and the alphabet. And it has been a totally change of what I lived with the last year course that I did of A1 level. So it has been like different, and I feel like when you try to change like the way that you teach, or you try to implement it, and you find out there are some things that you are like, maybe you can change, it will help you a lot to, you know, to be a better teacher, I believe.
Somebody else wanted to say something? So,
Teacher,
Giovanni?
okay, well, that is my opinion. Well, I think that if you really want to improve your English, you need to talk all the time with the native speaker in order to improve it. If you really want to be an excellent English teacher, you need to know how to speak English very well. Because I say that because there are a lot of English teachers who they think sometimes they have B2 or C1. But it's not true. In other words, they don't know much enough English to teach English in the classroom. So the students, they start to learn English with a lot of mistake. That is a very big problem. It's not, I'm not talking about all the teachers. I'm talking about a few English teachers. No, in general. Second, I think that maybe there are a lot of different English teachers who try to teach English in the classroom 100% in English, and all the explanation to the student is in English, no Spanish in the classroom. But sometimes at first it's impossible for the student to understand the first idea because they don't know how to speak English. So the teacher tried to explain some topic in English. For the student, it's difficult to understand because they don't understand anything at the first. I think that maybe it's important to mix Spanish at first and English, but when the student know the topic, is then you can express yourself in English all the time. But it's important to transmit all the communication to the student, and the student to make sure that the student understand the topic to continue to another one, because there are a lot of students that they don't know some topic, for example the present perfect, then they pass to the passive voice. When they have a communication in the real life, they meet different tense at the same time, and they don't know how to speak. So I think that it's important to clarify the topic and then practice, because the practice makes perfect. That is my opinion, teacher. That's what I think.
Teacher,
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 me.
Just a second. Giovanni, you mentioned three ideologies regarding how to learn and teach a language. So your ideologies are, if you want to learn English, you need to talk with native people. If you
Okay.
want to learn English, you need to practice, and if you and you can use English and Spanish in class regarding or based on previous knowledge people might have or students might have about it.
Yes, teacher, because
Those
you
those
because you will be able to learn English here in your own country, because you don't need to get away from the country to learn English, because you can use a different tool. For example, YouTube or some podcast in English, you can improve your listening. Maybe you, you can speak English without problem. But it's important to share with the native speaker, because that person correct at the same time your mistake. Maybe
yeah, well,
that is
the idea is not to say if you are right or wrong, but to mention that those are your ideologies about teaching and learning the language. So those are
okay.
the three ones that you have, and that those ideologies are going to influence the way you teach in class. So you're going
Mhm.
to try to get a guests to your class or have students listen to native people, or you're going to use both languages, Spanish and English. Those are the decisions that you're going to make in class because you have those ideologies about teaching and learning.
Sure.
That's what I say is sometimes difficult for me to have to deal with the previous ideologies that students have about how to teach and learn.
Yes,
Teacher.
I think that maybe at first it would be important. I say that because uh, all the students, for example, 5 years in the elementary school and 6 years in the high school, 11 years studying English every day, studying English 2 hours or maybe some 6 or 8 hours per week. That means 11 years. It's a lot of time. And when they finish the high school, they don't know anything about English. Now we have a big problem here in Colombia with the school. I think that we have to correct all that mistake. I think that maybe in the elementary school we can prepare the student, and we can mix English and Spanish to understand all the topic, the grammar or vocabulary or whatever. And in the high school, just English all the time. That's I think that maybe that kind of way the student when they finish his high school is going to be better, and they are going to get a better results.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni.
Sure.
Paola and then John.
yes,
So
teacher.
me? Paula
Uh,
first. Okay.
okay, thank you. Okay, about my experience, I think in depend of the age, sorry, depends on the age and also the school. For example, in my school, some students no live in Bogota because it's the police school. So in 2 months in Bogota, then in other place, and continue like that. So I try to speak in English, but it's impossible. They don't understand me what is they talk about. But I know some students, for example, my grade, fourth grade, they learn very fast to speak English. But I use, for example, a movie, YouTube videos, songs, so they understand me what is the topic. but sometimes speak in Spanish and speak in English. I try to speak in English all the time, but it's difficult. It's difficult because they some don't understand me what I meaning. So I try to speak in English and Spanish. And according to other things, for example, I have experience with one boy that is from USA. I only speak in English. Eh, that was about 5 years ago. I know that a school that always bilingual school, and then in the Spanish class, they understand me what is talk about in Spanish. So I think that they have a chips to understand both English and Spanish. And the father say, no, please speak in Spanish because I want to speak the English Spanish. And then when now, 1 years ago, they finish the school and then speak both English and Spanish in the same time. So I see it depends for the kid, for the school, for the how do you learn English or Spanish according to the students. So I think both we can learn English and Spanish and depend for the students.
Okay, so your ideology is that regarding or based on the school policy, students' previous knowledge, and the place where the person is, you are going to use either Spanish or English or both in class. That's your ideology, right?
Yes, teacher.
Okay, John?
Okay, teacher. My ideology is first, we need to create English environment area. Why? Because I think that according to my experience, I was living in Curacao, Netherlands Island, and over there I was working with some person from Holland. They speak just Holland or Dutch and English, two languages. And my boss used to speak with me English all the time. But sometimes at that time I was learning to speak English, but I didn't understand anything. But day by day, I was constant my ear listening to her. I was learning step by step. According to that experience, when I coming back to Colombia, when I was teaching English and some institute, the focus that I was teaching is communicative approach. For example, for me, the communicative approach is very important according you want to transmit to the student. If you want to teach to the student, they want to communicate each other's, this is very well. Now, if you want the students learn deeply the English, you can teach them grammars, some situation like this. According my ideology is to teach and create English environment areas because I think the humans has the capabilities to learn and step by step. I mean, for example, if you are learning every day and you are teaching to your students, you can teach them the exactly words that they need to ask you. For example, teacher, how do you say this in English? Teacher, what does mean this in English? Some specific words you can teach them, and the students are learning how they are going to ask you. For that reason, we are learning day by day. They custom to speak English and they effort. But in our hands, for me, it's not very good when you give to the student easily way. For example, Spanish, English, English, Spanish. Why? Because the first reason is we are in Colombia. In Colombia, when you are teaching English, you have just 2 hours teaching them. After finish the class, they come back to listen Spanish at home with their friends on the street, but just they had 2 hours in the classroom to listen real conversation in English. This is my ideology, create English environment area.
Okay, so you are not going to use Spanish in class based on
No,
your ideology.
I don't like it.
Good. So is this clear, the idea of ideologies? You have questions about that?
No, teacher, thank you.
Teacher,
Yes.
Hello,
Yes.
teacher. Sorry, my voice very bad. Can I participate about the what
Yes.
that our friends were saying? I don't know about Colombian system. I can just talking about the Turkish system, but the system here is in the classroom, science preschool, kindergarten. They have two teachers, grammar teacher and speaking skills teacher. The grammar teacher try to explain to them in Turkish, but they also try more of the time talking in English. But for specialties and the all primary school until the first 2 years, the middle school, they had both teacher, but one of them is for grammar. They explain the grammar topics in Turkish. After second year, the middle school, they both teachers only talking with the students in English, but they had two teachers in the classroom, one native teacher or foreigner teacher and one Turkish teacher. I don't know how is the methodology in Colombia, is the system. But here is like that.
Okay, no, it
They
depends.
speak here.
As we have a chair, so it depends on the teacher, it depends on the school. And
Mhm.
Paola also mentioned that it depends on the student's previous knowledge. So, in the case of some of your classmates, they were for immersion schools where it is not allowed to the use of Spanish in class. But in other schools, it's up to the teacher. So, according to the ideology that each one has, they are going to use either both Spanish and English or no Spanish at all. So those aspects are related to the decisions that teachers make in class regarding the use of Spanish in this case.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
and
here, for
I was,
example, oh, sorry.
no, go
Sorry.
ahead, go ahead, so go ahead.
And there are some schools, private schools, they only has English in the classroom science, kindergarten, but not too much schools have this is political, just schools, bilingual schools, but they just English. But some teachers, for example, in my case, we only speak with them English, not Turkish. I know some Turkish teacher they have to follow in one one program, one curriculum, and they have to explain Turkish. But I know some teachers they don't like speak with the students in Turkish. Like Paola says, some teachers want only speak English in the classroom. There are some teachers, but about curriculums, but some teachers go away from the curriculums here sometimes.
So in that case, something similar to the article that you read happens in the school. So the
Mhm.
school has a policy, but depending on the ideologies that students, teachers, parents have, they are going to use either Turkish or English in class
Yes.
or at
Okay.
school.
Thank you.
Christian?
But those policies at school, they can also be flexible. I mean, they can also. I'm asking you. I don't know. In our school, we have been like going through the process of building our language policy, and there are different like perspectives on whether we shouldn't use Spanish at all, or maybe implementing the code switching. But those policies, once is set or once is finished, the document itself, it can undergo changes, right? Depending on whether they work in our community, in our school community, or whether we find other strategies that work best, right?
Well, the level of flexibility is different for each school, and it's more difficult if you have a camera and if you have a person who observes your class. So it depends on the school. But if you ask me about my ideology regarding the use of Spanish in class, I will tell you that is based on the student's previous knowledge. So if they are beginners, they are going to need more help from the teacher regarding the use of cognates and the use of chunks and sometimes the use of Spanish. So you need to have a very easy, you need to help your student understand by using like those strategies, cognates and chunks, pictures, gestures before you use Spanish.
Well,
Yes.
I was gonna say something. I'm a strong believer that Spanish shouldn't be like taught in class. That's my ideology. Only English. And where I work at, English teachers receive a extra bonus every month, just by talking to them in English. But if you see you talking to them in Spanish, you will not get that bonus. Yeah,
Yes.
it's the school's ideology, and we teachers there talk to them all the time in English, in the cafeteria, in the bathroom, in the break, homeroom. Homeroom was taught, well, actually, it was taught code switching, but they said no, English teachers only in English, right? So it's
That's a good
been,
idea to keep the policy.
yeah, it is, and it works really good.
Yeah, of course you're highly motivated because of the bonus. No, I
We
think
are,
the
yeah.
same way.
A purpose.
And I think we have had this debate, little
Yeah.
debate in previous classes, and I'm the same way. I strongly believe that only English works great. But I'm facing this year, I'm facing a totally different scenario. I teach fourth grade, and the third graders that I received this year, actually in October, because we are in the transition of changing calendars, so I received my new school grade in October, and it's been a huge challenge because these kids, I mean, most of the class are not in the level in which they should be, and it's been extremely difficult to get them to have the flow of the class as I used to have in previous years. But I keep on trying, but I feel like I'm going crazy.
But that's where we
Yes.
teachers come out to flow and find strategies for them to understand, no?
Yeah, but something that adds to this situation is that it's a huge class, more than usual.
How
So
many kids per
I
class?
got 33 this year because of two
Wow.
repeating students and because of a special case student. So yeah, it's being extremely difficult.
Well, that's a pretty big class. Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
But you're a
But
teacher, and you have to find a way to for them to understand in
we
English.
will, yes. Thanks.
Yeah, so you will try to get them learn a little bit more of what they already know. But it depends on their abilities, it depends on the help they get at home, etc.
Yes.
Okay, is this topic clear? The three concepts, uh, regarding how to define groups, the topic of power and the topic of ideologies.
Yes, teacher, yes.
Yes, teacher.
Theologies is very
Yes.
clear.
Okay.
Yes,
Questions?
teacher.
Many examples.
Good. All right, good.
Everything clear.
So you will continue studying in or working in groups. This course is divided into social linguistics and then neuroeducation. So you will be reading one chapter more about social linguistics, and then we will move to neuroeducation in March.
Okay.
All right, so that's all for tonight. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Okay,
Good night.
teacher.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for
See
the
you next week.
class.
Bye bye.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
See
Thank you
you
very
next
much.
week.
Thank you very
Bye
much,
bye.
teacher, and to
Thank you, everybody.
our
Have a good night,
classmates.
teacher.
Everything
Have
was
a good
wonderful.
night, classmate.
Yes.
Bye,
Yes.
bye, Luis
Thank you very
Felipe.
much, everyone.
Bye. God
Bye.
bless you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
God bless you.
Goodbye,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye bye.
I love you. We learned a lot
Good
today.
night.
Good night.
Bye.